What if I told you that Ferrari could have found a way to control the rear tires like no one else on the grid? But that the FIA is already investigating it after what it saw in the second week of testing in Bahrain. Because what happened in those days was not normal. The SF26 showed behavior on the rear axle that baffled several teams. Extreme stability on long runs, surprisingly linear degradation, and traction that seemed to activate just at the exact moment the tire entered its ideal window. Too precise. Too perfect. And when something is too perfect in Formula One, someone starts asking questions. The Federation has already requested data. Heights, maps, internal temperatures, dynamic behavior of the rear axle. There is no direct accusation, but there is a magnifying glass placed on Maranello before the season even officially starts. And that changes everything. Today we are going to analyze what the FIA discovered in that second week in Bahrain, what is the possible hidden trick of the SF26 with the rear tires, and why this could become the first major technical and political impact of 2025 for Ferrari. We are not talking about an obvious difference in a fast lap. It was not a car that blew up the stopwatch in simulated qualifying. It was something deeper, more structural, more difficult to detect with the naked eye but impossible to ignore when you analyze the long runs. What began to generate suspicion was not a visible piece, but a consequence. The rear tire entered the thermal window extremely precisely and, most importantly, stayed inside it for more laps than its rivals in similar conditions. In an environment where rear degradation is usually one of the most sensitive factors in Bahrain due to abrasion, traction and lateral loading, Ferrari seemed to manage in a more linear way. No abrupt thermal peaks. No sudden drops in performance. When engineers from other teams began to cross-check data sector by sector, they detected something even more interesting. The gain of the SF26 was not only in the exit of the curve, but in the previous transition. That is, the moment where the car stabilizes the platform before applying gas. That points directly to the rear suspension and dynamic height control. This is where the key concept that the FIA began to review comes in, the rear aerodynamic platform. In today's single-seaters, keeping the diffuser in the optimal operating window is absolutely critical. If the car goes up too much, it loses charge. If it falls excessively, it may cause a loss or generate instability. Ferrari, in this second week, seemed to maintain that height within an extremely narrow range even in aggressive transfer phases. We are not talking about a prohibited system of interconnected suspension. It is not an active mechanism. It's something finer. A very aggressive combination of geometry, structural rigidity and progressive behavior that stabilizes the rear just when the tire needs it most. This stability reduces unnecessary slippage and therefore prevents surface overheating. The direct consequence is brutal. The tire does not suffer a thermal peak that then forces the driver to manage. Instead, the rubber reaches its ideal range and stays there. And when that happens, the car is not only faster, it's more predictable. And when it's more predictable, the rider can push harder without punishing the rear axle. Furthermore, in the visual analysis it was detected that the car breathed differently compared to others. On the straight it seemed freer, but when braking it compressed with a smoothness that did not generate rebounds or abrupt variations. That clean transition is precisely what raised the questions. Because if this stability is generating an indirect benefit in the thermal management of the tire, then we are facing a structural advantage, not a circumstantial one. That is why the FIA requested specific data after this second week. Dynamic heights, internal tire temperature records, aerodynamic behavior maps in different loading phases. It is not an accusation. It's a verification. But in Formula One, when the Federation asks for data before the first race, it means that something has attracted too much attention. The true impact of what happened in the second week of testing in Bahrain is not only technical, it's in what it can trigger. Because when the FIA starts collecting specific data on dynamic heights, aerodynamic maps and internal rear tire temperatures before the official start of the championship, the next step can completely change the competitive balance. This is where we get to the critical point. If the SF26's advantage is based on an extreme but legal interpretation of the regulations, Ferrari has pure gold on its hands. But if the Federation considers that this combination of rear suspension, platform control and flow management towards the diffuser borders on the spirit of the regulations, it could issue a clarifying technical directive. And in Formula One, a technical directive does not need to declare something illegal to neutralize it. Simply redefining operating limits is enough to force teams to modify configurations. If that happens, the effect would be immediate. The supposed hidden trick of the SF26 does not appear to be a specific part that you can remove and replace without consequences. It is a comprehensive concept. It is the way in which the car maintains the stability of the rear axle during the most delicate phases of the curve. If Ferrari is forced to minimally alter that geometry or soften that structural rigidity to comply with a stricter interpretation, the thermal balance of the rear tire could change radically. And this is where the strategic impact becomes enormous. In Bahrain, the pattern seen was a much more linear rear degradation. That means Ferrari could extend stints without suffering abrupt drops in performance. On circuits with high traction and abrasion, this allows you to open different strategic windows. You can extend a stop. You can cover undercuts with greater peace of mind. You can even force rivals to pit early. If that advantage disappears or is reduced, Ferrari would go from having strategic flexibility to being within the same margin as the rest. On the other hand, if the FIA reviews the data and concludes that everything is within the regulatory framework, the message would be devastating for the rest of the teams. It would mean that Ferrari has found a superior way to control the rear platform without crossing the regulatory line. And in that case, rivals will not ask for clarification. They will copy the concept. They will study it. They will try to replicate that structural stability. But developing a suspension and platform concept is not something that can be copied in 2 weeks. We must also consider the political context. Ferrari is not just another team. Every technical move in Maranello has historical and media weight. If the public narrative starts to revolve around a possible hidden trick with the rear tires, external pressure will increase. And when pressure increases, the FIA usually acts with greater caution to avoid major controversies. The final scenario that opens after what happened in the second week of testing in Bahrain is the most delicate of all, because we are no longer talking about suspicions or requests for data, we are talking about real consequences for the start of the championship. And here Ferrari faces a silent but decisive turning point. If the FIA reviews all the telemetry requested dynamic heights, active wing maps, internal rear tire temperatures, suspension behavior and transfer phases and concludes that the SF26 is completely within the regulatory framework, the message would be devastating for its rivals. Not only would it mean that Ferrari has not crossed any lines, but that it has found a superior interpretation of the regulations in a critical area of the car, the stability of the rear platform and its direct impact on the thermal management of the tire. And if that advantage remains intact, the start of the season can take a very clear direction. Because the true value of what was seen in Bahrain is not in the fastest lap, it is in the repetition. It is in the ability to keep the rear tire in its optimal window for longer without overheating peaks or abrupt degradation. In a championship where the differences between the 4 leading teams can be minimal, having a more linear degradation allows you to play with strategies from a position of strength. You can force more constant rhythms, you can respond better to undercuts, you can lengthen stints when the rest begin to suffer a drop in performance. That means race control. And when you have race control, you reduce the margin for strategic error. Ferrari wouldn't have to react to what others do, they could force others to react to them. That is the true full impact of the supposed hidden trick on SF26. But there is a second scenario that is no less relevant. Even if the FIA does not declare anything illegal, the simple fact of having focused on that area forces Ferrari to live with constant surveillance. Every race, every technical review, every post-session analysis will have a higher level of scrutiny. And that adds internal pressure. Because now each update, each suspension adjustment, each aerodynamic modification must remain consistent with what has already been examined. However, if Ferrari manages to get through that review stage without forced changes, the narrative will change radically. It will no longer be the team under suspicion. It will be the team that found a better solution within the rules. And in Formula 1, when a concept is publicly validated, the rest begin to copy it. But copying structural stability to the rear axle is not a matter of a minor update. It involves redesigning suspension philosophy, reviewing rigidities, and adapting the behavior of the diffuser. That takes time. And in a calendar as compressed as 2025, time is money. The SF26 did not attract attention for being the most outrageously fast in simulated qualifying. It attracted attention for its structural stability at the most critical moment for any modern car: rear tire management in transfer and traction phases. That ability to keep the aerodynamic platform within an extremely controlled range, to avoid thermal spikes and to sustain a more linear degradation, is what set off the silent alarms. What happened in Bahrain was not an open scandal. It was something more dangerous, a potential advantage under observation. And now the championship starts with an invisible tension, with a magnifying glass placed on the rear axle of the SF26 and with the uncertainty of whether we are facing the birth of a technical masterpiece, or the beginning of a new regulatory war? Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.